Mixing with Mike, plugin of the week is the Plugin Alliance BX Console Focusrite SC. SC stands for Studio Console. This is the audio examples video. If you want to look at the features, some of which I'll go over here, then look at the features video. So there's a separate video that kind of goes over the individual features and signal flow of the Focusrite channel strip. So this is an amazing new addition to the Brainworks or Plugin Alliance collection. Really so happy to see this. I have a long history of working on Focusrite consoles. I worked on the second ever Focusrite console built by Rupert Neve in Electric Lady Studio A. Spent thousands of hours doing tracking sessions and mix sessions on that console. Understand it inside and out. Really an amazing thing. This is actually not an emulation of those two consoles, neither of which are in operation. The original, I think, was at Master Rock Studios. This is an emulation of the console that followed after Phil Duddridge, former owner of Soundcraft, went and took over the assets and turned Focusrite into a console manufacturer where they took all of the hard, amazing work of Rupert Neve and they sort of pared everything back and put it into a design that was actually functionally more sound. As amazing sounding as those two original consoles were, they were a bit of a technical nightmare to maintain, and the signal flow flexibility was so unbelievable and revolutionary in terms of everything from like remote mic preamps, everything in the live room to individual bands being able to assign to anywhere of 4 different places within a channel strip. Astounding signal flow things was just too much. And so they created something that was actually affordable. I think the console for, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong about this, the original console for Electric Lady Studios was $1.2 million, which is a pretty high price for any console, for a 64-channel console nonetheless. So let's dive right in and just get into some audio examples. And we'll start a little bit here with the EQ, and then we'll kind of work backward a bit to the compression. One of the things that I wanted to focus on is really an approach to working with this. So what I have here, just quickly, and maybe we'll just start with a quick audio example here. What I have is a whole setup here where I ran only BX console with the Focusrite channel strip going across, other than a tiny little bit of automation here on the trim switch and the SVT, which is also from Brainworks. And what I have here, so I'm just going to bypass this in and out just so you can kind of hear the overall mix. So I have something here which is just a punk mix. I just put this together in a few hours and just to kind of get the feel for the console. And I have to say I'm really super happy with it. So let's just have a listen to it and then I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels, is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go. Well, is it too damn hard or is it too damn soft? Well, man, you just never know. And I hate everything about you. And you hate everything, I know you do. And I hate.
Okay, so just to give you a simple example, obviously I could probably have done a better job in terms of dealing with the makeup gain from the individual channels there. The vocal seems to stand out when everything is bypassed. But aside from that, you can hear the clarity and the openness of the desk. And this is sort of a signature part of the Focusrite console, which I think is different from the 80 series or the 8000 series Neves from the 1970s, which were much warmer and richer sounding. This has a richness to it as well, but it has more of this super high-end clarity that goes on forever. And I think the original spec on this unit goes up to 100 kilohertz flat, within a dB. So Rupert went all the way in terms of the design of this when he built it. Now, in terms of the ISA modules and all of that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the approach to the EQ. So I'm going to start here with just a little kick drum. Maybe we'll just kind of start with a little basics, some basics here with just kick drum, snare drum. I'm going to take this gate out. I wasn't really using it anyway. And talk a little bit about it, because one of the things that you'll come across when you're working with the module is the fact that the 4-band EQ that you have here, these two bands here, the high frequency and low frequency band, are fixed shelving EQs. So if you're familiar with like the 1081 EQ, you would have a bell switch that would be added in that would allow you to operate that. That doesn't exist here. He didn't put that in. I'm not exactly sure why, but it doesn't change the form and function of the way that you can operate. So for example here, instead of doing a sort of standard dip that I might do at 200, with with a parametric EQ here to kind of tighten up the low mids, or tighten up the low end, I could just put the shelf here at 270 and then boost on my fundamental wherever that is, somewhere in the 50s, and then I can sort of change the width of the cue here to focus in the low end of the kick drum. So let's just listen to it all in and out, and then I'll play around with some of the settings here. Maybe what I'll do is I'll paste this into a B slat here. So one of the things that you'll notice here is the transparency of it. When you pop it in and out, it just sounds so musical. It almost feels like, am I really EQing it? Because it's not fundamentally, there's not a lot of phase distortion at all in it. It just seems very clear. There are very few equalizers that operate this way. The GML 8200 is another one. It's like really amazing. That was just like spectacular for that kind of thing. So what I could do here is I can focus on this fundamental. Let me just try to push this a little bit so you can kind of get a sense of what's going on with that. So you could hear how that just kind of clears up a lot of that. And then if I want to, I can also tighten up that with a high pass filter here. And then also focus on the attack frequency here. So if I wanted something that was a little bit warmer here, I could shift that down closer to 600. Or focus on something that's got a little bit more aggressiveness with the attack. Very clean and open if I wanted to put a little bit of air on top of this. Just really so clean and open and beautiful. This is just like a real signature. So let's add in the snare drum here for a second. And I'll copy and paste this over to see. And the same basic approach here. So, in this particular case, I think I'm just kind of focusing somewhere on the fundamental or probably below it here. If I'm like at 108, this is going to add like a little bit of lower end body. Usually snare drums, especially just like with this, has probably got a fundamental closer to like 180 or something. But when I kick in there, I can kind of get a little bit more guts out of it, Here, I can use the ×3 switch to kind of get a little bit of snap out of it. And then the same thing here. Like I put a shelf on here at like 6.8, but I could also just kind of bring in some air and work it that way. right? Just amazing. It's like, I don't know, like this is exactly what the Focusrite sounds like in terms of that clarity and that air that's just added on. It's really amazing. So, all right, let me just zoom out here for a second and let's just kind of bring in the overheads just to give you an idea. All right, so this has the two modules and it has the links onto it, that are attached to it. Here, let's just kind of go like, a classic thing to do here, on overheads would be to kind of tuck out a little bit of the boxiness that usually exists somewhere in the 400 or 500 range. But and then I can also just, if there's, a bit of, if there's some snare fundamental that's sort of, in other words, depending on the miking technique, and get a little bit of body here out of the low mids and bring out a little bit more edge and or body in the snare, fatness. Right, so now those edgy cymbals there, well, let me just try this. Maybe if I go lower in frequency but boost less, maybe I can get a better angle on that. Let me kind of go here to where that kicks in. Okay, so you got a basic idea of what's going on with that. Now, I want to take a quick look here at, well, let's focus on a couple of other basic things here, like, for example, the bass. Now, the bass here, and then I'll go on to some of the compression things. The bass actually is, in this case, it's pretty distorted on its own. So I did a reamp on it just to kind of bring it a little bit more grit out of it. But here's the basic bass sound with and without the EQ. That sounds like a guitar. Okay, hold on. There we go. And let me grab the right module here. Okay. So this is a great place. Like, one of the classic things that I like to do, especially with the 1073, is just to get that low end on a shelf, like around 220. Here, the closest we can get to that is either 160 or 270. It may operate a little bit differently based on the sound, but you get a bit of that richness, that Neve richness and warmth that is sort of famous to, the 8000 series EQs. And it's not quite as rich, harmonically rich here, but you still get that control. This is not the greatest example, just based on the sound, which the original sound is a bit wiry and kind of thin. So I'm trying to draw something out of it, but still, also the ability to kind of get that note out of it. So when you turn down the speakers, you still get that. It's like somewhere like around, well, in this case, it worked out to be like around 1.5. Right? Okay, so let's move on to some guitar tracks. We got some guitars right here. They're sort of tied in together, so any adjustments I make on one should follow to the other. The only exception being just pasting in the settings. So I'll have to kind of. Oh, looks like I did it on both. Great, fantastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at how this sort of works with guitars. This is where the parametrics become really powerful, because I can go in and I can dig out some fundamental frequencies here. So right now I have like around 1 kilohertz. But with the Q, I can make that kind of very narrow, right? I can get it like very focused. Same here on the top end. Looks like I have something in the 2K range, 2.5. You notice that I'm doing a lot of boosting here, and that I don't know, it's kind of true with a lot of analog components. Somehow it helps with the sound in terms of driving the electronics. But just to give you an overall sense of how that operates within that, let's just kind of move over here, listen to this overall, just to kind of get a feel for it, and then we'll do some vocals. Like I have a room track that's probably very heavily compressed somewhere in there. Okay, so let's move on to some vocals. Just kind of focus on the lead vocal here with it, and give you a little bit of an idea or feeling for what this is all about. This EQ was almost perfectly designed for, well, really for everything, but especially for vocals. Just love it. Now, this vocal, it's like a punk vocal that was recorded with distortion, so that distortion effect is not coming from the Focusrite or anything that I'm doing there. There's kind of so many things we can kind of go with this. I haven't gotten into the harmonic distortion or the TMT. We'll do a little bit of that. But just to focus on this, and then we'll kind of work backward with some of the stuff. So let's pick up with the verse. Oh, I got the section muted. There we go.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels, is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go. Well, is it too damn hard or is it too damn soft? Well, man, you just never know.
So there's some things that I played around with here. You can see primarily what we just have is that top end boost. So clean and so clear and open, even with the distorted track. Never seems to ever sound harsh at all, boosting at that 10K. And that's a significant amount. It's like 11.5 dB. And you sometimes see these numbers and you think, that's crazy, but it doesn't ever sound like that. I mean, there's obviously a pretty heavy boost there. One of the thing here is that there's a little bit of a boxiness that's in there. Looks like it's around 400 like around 400 or so. There we go.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels. Is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go.
I think
well, is it too?
In the end, I think I left it out because it was just taken away from some of the focus in that mid-range. But you hear that sort of nasaliness, which is usually more of like an 800 thing. But yeah, just sort of sits in there probably because of the distortion. And then if I wanted to push like a mid frequency, I don't think it really needs this, but I could push a little bit more edginess there around 4 or 5K.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels. Is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go. Well, is it too damn hard or is it too damn soft? Well, man, you just never know. And I hate everything about you. And you hate everything.
It's just a little bit, brings out a little bit too much of the distortion. But again, very clean and open sounding. Now, in terms of the compression and the way it works, I'm not always necessarily the biggest fan of VCA compressors on vocals and things like that, but it actually can work quite well to kind of balance out a vocal. You see here I have like a fast release of 100 milliseconds, a little bit of makeup gain, 2-to-1 ratio. Sometimes like a nice even way of balancing out a vocal here is to have, all right, here we have like a slower attack time, like, around 30 milliseconds or so, and a light ratio, which allows me to go down lower in threshold, and that way the compression is never excessive. It's just kind of more of an evening out of the sound. So here I have like a 2-to-1 ratio. So let's check this out.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels. Is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go. Well, is it too damn hard or is it too damn soft? Well, man, you just never know. And I hate everything about you. And you hate everything, I know you do.
All right. I can also kind of dig in a little bit, go to like a lower threshold and run in a parallel.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go.
Let it get excessive.
Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels. Is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go. Well, is it too damn hard or is it too damn soft? Well, man, you just never know. And I hate everything about you. And you hate everything, I know you do. And I hate to hate, yeah, you know it's true. I bet you 5 to a nickel that I hate everything about you. You know I do.
All right, let's go back there. So just the makeup gain is that much because that's the makeup gain on just the compressed signal as it's mixed with the dry signal here. Right.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels. Is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go.
There's going to be one way to kind of bring in a focus within the track. Let's see what that sounds like in the context of everything else here.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know.
probably brings out a little bit too much of the distortion in that. But the basic, you get the fundamental flow of it, or the idea of it. I guess I might as well just kind of leave it in there, and just take it out. It's actually pretty amazing overall. If I operate it here, let me just kind of go back to more of the initial settings. There's an auto release setting, which is kind of cool, which gives you a little bit more of a broadcast kind of feel. Right?
Tired of the sunshine.
Oops, sorry about that.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels, is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go. Well, is it too damn hard or is it too damn soft? Well, man, you just never know. And I hate everything about you. And you hate everything, I know you do.
Sorry about that gain there with the vocal. But you can see how quickly you can dial something in that works there. So my little experiment went a little bit awry. There's also a de-esser that's built into this. So unfortunately, this is like too big here. Hold on, let me just see if I can slide that over so I can access it and show the console display. So the de-esser also has an exciter built into it. But let's.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line. Just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels, is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go.
So I could even focus in on the harshness there, closer to 3K.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way it feels, is it fake or is it real? So tired of letting go.
And this also gives you the ability to kind of go down in frequency.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the
So if there's like a boxy area there, I can kind of focus on that.
tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go.
Now the gain reduction is applied full frequency. It's not applied just to the frequency area. So it's not like a total ducking on that end, as far as I understand the circuit. And I could be wrong about that. Pretty sure that's the case. But you get an idea here of what you can do with it, or you could operate it just as sort of a more or less a de-esser. And you'll see the gain reduction here in the LED that lights up over here, so it doesn't show up in the gain reduction section here. There's also a way to use the expander for this. So let me go back, or the exciter. Let's go back to the drums here and focus a little bit on this, maybe with the kick and the snare. You see, oh wait. Really, just to get the attack out of it, you need, an attack frequency that's up higher, so it's just a transient that's triggering it. When I went to the lower frequency, it's not going to give you just that particular frequency boosted, so it's not that type of an exciter or an expander within that frequency range. It's a full thing, so it's probably better in with the trigger being up on the attack frequency or something up higher, just as a trigger for it, so that you get the responsiveness of it. But you could hear what that basically does, and a similar type of thing for the snare drum. So this is actually quite a useful feature, just to kind of give yourself a little bit more aggressiveness or attack. And as far as the way that the compressors work, amazing in terms of the range of control of it. It has a similar characteristic, as a VCA compressor with the over easy to what the DBX 160X is, although much cleaner and more open sounding. If that makes sense for those of you who have experience with that. Not the original DBX 160, the single rack unit one that they came out with later with the over easy switch that was built in it. It created this sort of smoothness. Essentially all that is just like a knee characteristic, which is added onto it. But standard features here, like in terms of ratio, you got the limiter that's built in here, threshold for triggering. You could see your gain reduction here. Again, the EQ could be applied either pre or post dynamic, and then a broad range of attack and release settings. You also have the auto release built into it. Makeup gain. You can run parallel chains if you want to really get really aggressive with something, like for example here with the room track, not the bass track. Sounds like it's already pretty aggressively compressed. You can get as aggressive as you need to be with that. It's also got this circuit built in. See what that sounds like with the drum sound in. Add like a nice depth to the drum kit. So there's a lot of flexibility with this. The exciter circuit, as you dive into it more, we haven't even gotten into the filtering sections here and how you can use those to control the way that the compressor and gate sections trigger. That also is another powerful element there because you have the parametrics, so you can have transient energy focus to make the compressor more active. There's just loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of stuff and ways to go with it. So one other quick thing I'm going to do here, just the final thing, is just the tolerance modeling technology. So I'm just going to go through a couple of options here, and then so let me before I let me just escape out of this for a second. All right, so here we go.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites, man, you just never know. I'm tired of the way.
All right, so I kind of got some things a little wacky out of balance here, but it essentially what you're doing with this is it's switching up the varied settings, creating a variation of settings for each channel. So all of the instantiations when you first put them on will go to 1 or 1 and 2, so they're fundamentally all the same. As I go through and hit the tolerance modeling and randomly change the channels for all of them, sometimes you can stumble across something that opens up the sound that makes it really amazing. So let's just double check that here.
Tired of the sunshine, tired of the straight line, time to just let it go. Tired of the politics, tired of the hypocrites.
That one sounds good. What that subtle variation just creates a little variance in that way changes subtly the characteristic and creates a little bit of separation between the individual um, channels of the mixer, so that every sound sounds like a little bit more independent or separated from each other. And I think that was one of the most overlooked things to me of channel strips and all analog emulations. So this includes every plugin as well. Is that there's a certain no two are identical to each other, even if they're consecutive serial numbers. They end up being a little bit off. They don't act exactly the same. They don't sound exactly the same. There are some very subtle differences between them, and those variations create sort of a distortion or a character shift for each element in the mix that creates a subtle separation that adds depth and clarity. And that's the whole idea of that. I'm going to leave this here because I want to use this to also feature another plugin, a new release from the Plugin Alliance. But Focusrite console, really amazing. Great sounding desk, and just a huge addition. I'm going to use this on my next mix immediately because I'm loving the way that it acts and interacts, and just the whole thing really takes me back to the past, all those years that I spent working on the Focusrite console at Electric Lady. So there you have it. The plugin of the week, audio example edition of the BX console Focusrite SC.